so I don't forget later.
I'm just going to stay muted over here too, so if
Cool.
you need anything, let me know.
Thanks, Anna. Okay. Can't believe this is the second last ALOA training, you guys.
It's so crazy.
Yeah.
You've done a really good job with all of it.
Yeah,
Thanks.
seriously.
It felt like a marathon and a sprint. Well, 43 people were able to figure out the link, so you didn't completely fail. And that's only the people who are early, I'm sure a lot of people are going to find it right now. All right, are you ready?
Yeah.
You got this.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Animal Liberation Online Assembly. Thank you so much for being here. It's so nice to see everyone's faces. I love when we all have our video on and we can see this beautiful gallery of, of activists from all over the world. Yeah, thank you so much to everyone for joining us. This is the Animal Liberation Online Assembly. I'm sure a lot of you have been with us for previous trainings, so you kind of know our usual drill. We just wait a couple minutes at the beginning for some of those people who just needed an extra minute to find the link. And we just take a couple minutes to really just kind of arrive at the training. This is just an invitation here to, if you need to, find a spot to sit down or somewhere where you can, take the call and participate, especially in the beginning. We're going to be asking for folks to participate in a couple of different ways. So if you need to take a minute and find somewhere to sit down, you can do that now. And we also ask people to rename themselves on Zoom. So you can just find 3 little dots above your face in the gallery and click rename, and you can put your name in there and your pronouns. And it's also great if you can put your location, because then when we're all scrolling through, we can see like maybe there's someone who we don't know that lives near us and we can meet a new friend on the call. We also have Amanda, our amazing ASL interpreter, here today, and I'm just gonna pass it over to her to say something for a second in case you need to pin her video.
Yes, hello. So to pin my video, if you see my screen, the top right corner, there's 3 little dots and a little blue box. Just click on that and then you'll see it say pin video. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And yeah, just so much gratitude to Amanda for being on these calls and helping us to make this more accessible to lots of people. Yeah, I see lots of twinkles for that. So yeah, thank you all again so much for joining us. And this is the Animal Liberation Online Assembly, and we have an amazing training tonight put on by 2 incredible activists who I've admired for a long time and now have the honor to work alongside of them. So this is How to Win Civil Disobedience to Make History, and it's so exciting to welcome Rachel and Lewis tonight. And yeah, I'm just going to pass it over to them to get us started.
Thanks
so much, Joanna. Cool. So I'm Lewis. I'm an organizer and investigator with Direct Action Everywhere in Berkeley, California. And Rachel, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm also an organizer in the SF8 area.
And you can hear Rachel's pigeons in the background there, keeping us company.
Yeah.
Cool. So I'm going to share this screen and we can jump in. Everybody see that? Cool. Okay, so I just want to start off with some agreements, and we are talking about, a very fun and exciting topic today, civil disobedience. And civil disobedience can obviously entail legal risk. That's part of the definition of civil disobedience. A lot of us may have been involved in civil disobedience or other high-risk actions in the past, or maybe we're planning on being involved in the future. But we want to keep any confidential information out of this training. This is not the place to be discussing plans or past actions that we've been involved in that are not public. So we want to be really careful, and we want to all agree that we're not going to discuss past actions that are not not public and that we're not going to discuss any plans we have for the future. And we're also not going to discuss any actions, regardless of whether we think they're public, that others have taken. Other ground rules: participate in the chat. I'm going to be asking some questions and asking for participation. And the more we can all participate, the more we'll all learn from this. And it'll just be more fun and engaging. And definitely don't be afraid to ask questions. I might not see every question that gets asked in the chat. Rachel might not see them all, but we can kind of accumulate those, make sure that they get answered, and then we can definitely save space in the end to answer all of those questions that you have. So we can just jump in, and I want to start off with a fun icebreaker. And I know I just said no conversation of confidential stuff, right? So we want to maintain that. But I do want to ask, have you ever been arrested for activism or for not activism? Have you just ever been arrested? If it was public, tell us. If not, don't tell us. But you can jump into the chat. Have you ever been arrested? Where and when? I'm seeing Stacy got arrested last year at ALC at Reichardt Duck Farm. That's awesome. So many of us were arrested there. Anyone else? Aura was Sunrise 2018. That's OG. That's awesome. Wow, Mark was arrested with ACT UP. That's amazing. In 1990. We'll be discussing ACT UP a bit today. I'm seeing ALC 2019, McCoy Poultry 2019. This is awesome. Lots of people that haven't been arrested yet. That's awesome too. Just more opportunity, right? For sled dogs action in Canada last year, I saw that action. That was amazing. Meet the victims in Canada last April. That was an awesome action. Fantastic. Yeah, scroll through this chat. This is really inspiring, seeing all the different actions that people here have taken a part of, and all the people here that have never been arrested that are maybe interested and want to learn more today. So that's even more exciting. Joanna's saying she's tried pretty hard to get arrested but never have. A lot of us can maybe relate to that as well. Okay, great. So let's jump into the content here. Don't be afraid to keep going in the chat and jump in if you have any questions. So I want to start off, as always, with a little discussion of where we are now as a movement, as a society, as humans who live on this earth in 2020. There are a lot of privileges that we've accumulated, some more than others for sure, and there's a lot of progress that has been made, although there's a lot more progress to be made for all kinds of causes. But I want to ask really quickly, can you think of any examples of who are the people, who are the movement, what are the events that have changed the world for the better and made the world that we live in today? And what are the movements that have made the change that make our lives better and safer and more free today? I'm seeing the civil rights movement for sure. Civil rights movement, especially in the United States, is a classic example. The Montgomery March is an action in the civil rights movement. Yeah, the labor movement, Black Lives Matter, women's suffrage, the right for women to vote, the fur-free movement. Yes, absolutely. Anti-fur activism in the animal rights movement has done so much for so long, and now we've been able to ban fur in many areas. Indigenous movements, LGBT plus movement, foie gras campaigns, anti-foie gras campaigns. Yeah, these are fantastic examples. OSHA, child labor laws, definitely. Labor organizing, disability rights, Greta Thunberg, however you want to pronounce her name. Right to rescue soon, yeah, ocean warriors. So these are some fantastic examples. And I think it's really important that we realize that as an animal rights movement, we're a social justice movement, just like all of these movements that have come before us. there's so much we can learn from them. There's so much we can look to in what was successful for them, what wasn't as successful, what are mistakes that they made that they were able to learn from and that we can learn from it as well. And it's also important that we respect the work of activists that have come before us. So I want to talk, I'm seeing EZLN, the Zapatistas in Mexico. That's a great example. Want to talk about civil disobedience and what it is. So whether you've heard of civil disobedience or not, give us your best guess. What are some examples of civil disobedience tactics that have been used throughout history? Sit-ins, absolutely, great example. Hunger strikes, walkouts, road blockades, yes, boycotts, disruptions, lockdowns, chaining yourself to stuff, absolutely, one of my favorites. Factory takeovers, marches. There are so many examples. Rescues. Civil disobedience is a really broad category of actions, and there are a lot of examples. So some of the classic examples we think of are various kinds of protests, street blockades, lockdowns. Open rescue is a specific example for the animal rights movement. Sit-ins, banner drops. Basically, anytime we are challenging legal precedent through breaking that law itself because we think that that law is unjust. So whether we're trying to force ourselves to be arrested, whether we're trying to put the police in a situation where they're in a dilemma where they don't want to arrest us, or whether we are just trying to bring attention to an issue, anytime we are using these kind of tactics, that's an example of being civilly disobedient. So for those of us in the animal rights movement, and for many movements, there's kind of an ongoing debate about whether civil disobedience and a variety of tactics are the right way to make change. And I'm sure that a lot of us have heard arguments for and against civil disobedience, but for now, let's just talk about what are some arguments against civil disobedience that you've heard or that you maybe hold yourself. It's counterproductive. Yeah, it makes us seem extreme, makes vegans look bad, turns people away from veganism, getting a felony on your record. Absolutely like a great argument against civil disobedience. Mark is saying it can be dangerous, and it absolutely can. Yeah, so examples of arguments against civil disobedience. I'm sure we've all heard some of these. Costs money. So the classic examples of arguments against civil disobedience are lions, though. No, I'm joking. That's not an argument against civil disobedience, but sometimes as a protester, as someone who believes in civil disobedience, when I'm talking to people who don't, I feel like I'm arguing against non-vegans, and just like when I started going vegan, doing outreach, it's the same kind of arguments I see. But people say that it makes us look bad. It makes us look too radical. It scares away potential supporters that maybe they would have gone vegan. We should just be nice. We should go about it the right way. We just need to educate the public. Or maybe it's not time yet. Society isn't ready. And I think an underlying argument in all of these arguments is that animals don't deserve that kind of sacrifice. I think for a lot of us that might argue against civil disobedience in the animal rights movement, we wouldn't argue against it when Black Lives Matter is getting arrested. We wouldn't argue against it when we look back at the civil rights movement. But we don't believe that animals deserve that kind of bold action. But all of us here today, hopefully we do believe that. And we believe that animals deserve whatever kind of action that we can take. So now I want to talk a little bit about the history of a couple movements, and I want to talk about key takeaways we can take away from them. So first off, I want to talk about ACT UP, and super cool that Mark was saying earlier that he actually got arrested with ACT UP in 1990. So shout out to Mark, that's really awesome, and I would love to hear more about that at some point. So let's just place ourselves here. The year is 1982. An unknown virus is sweeping through the gay community in the United States. Around 500 people have died from the mysterious disease, at this point being called gay-related immune deficiency. And for the tight-knit LGBT communities across the country, this was an absolutely terrifying moment that I can't even begin to comprehend. So the next year, members of Congress launched an investigation into the handling of this still growing epidemic, and they reported a serious lack of cooperation by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And they said that this lack of cooperation was impeding the work of studying the cause, treatment, and prevention of this horrible, terrifying disease. And at this point, over 550 people have died in the US alone. The government has heard reports of at least 1,500 cases nationwide just in the past 2 years. So why would the CDC refuse to cooperate with an investigation by Congress? Well, sadly, at this point, those most affected by AIDS were not a priority to the Reagan administration. The virus was thought to only afflict gay men and intravenous drug users. And these are obviously two groups that were not at the time seen as worthy of very much consideration or work. And in this text, Reagan's press secretary actually laughs at the so-called gay plague when questioned by reporters. So a really horrible situation. And by 1987, almost 17,000 people had died in the United States alone. The crisis had increased the stigma and discrimination against gay people, and very little medical progress had been made as a result of lack of funding by the federal government. In March of '87, hundreds of people gathered in the Lesbian and Gay Community Service Center in downtown Manhattan. Many of them knew dozens or hundreds of people that have died over the last few years, and many of them were sick themselves. They had enough of being ignored, and the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, or ACT UP, was born. Over the next 10 years, ACT UP accumulated thousands of participants across 70 chapters. They executed bold and exciting actions, from die-ins on busy streets to putting a giant condom on the house of a senator who opposed AIDS funding. And they even dumped the ashes of their friends who had died on the lawn of the White House. And look at this giant condom. Isn't that such a creative action? Who would have thought of that? And it just got so much press attention. It cast a media spotlight. And ACT UP really did that work of creating a media spotlight on this issue. And they forced a dialogue where one had been ignored for far too long. They're widely credited for forcing government action and making the progress that we have today. And AIDS today is still a global issue. But the life and survival rate of an HIV positive person in the United States has completely changed since those days in 1987. And we know that this is largely thanks to the work of these brave activists who were taking risks and doing what they had to do to force a dialogue here. We know when we look throughout history that those in power rarely give attention to the plight of the oppressed, unless they're made to be so uncomfortable that they have absolutely no choice. And this is the case with the AIDS epidemic, the AIDS crisis. This is the case with women's suffrage. Women were facing issues across the United States, around the world. They were unable to vote. They were considered property. But because they were not in the powerful group, they were ignored, and their issues were ignored by those in power until they were able to force a dialogue. And we know that the AIDS crisis is not over still. There are people suffering around the world. But like I said, a lot of progress has been made. So let's take it back a little bit further to Birmingham, Alabama in the year 1963. So the civil rights movement is in full swing, and Martin Luther King Jr. is at the head of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or the SCLC. Birmingham was known as one of the most segregated cities in the United States, and it was actually nicknamed Bombingham for the rampant bombings committed against the Black community. And the police at this time was headed by the aggressive and violent segregationist known as Bull Connor. Eugene Bull Connor was known around the world for advocating segregation and threatening violence against anyone who would challenge segregation. He actually, even in this bomb blast that killed 4 children and injured 17 people in a church, he blamed the Black community standing up for their rights. So this was an absolutely horrible place, and Dr. King considered it the most segregated city in the United States. The movement had embraced a new form of nonviolent action in '63, and it was more bold and uncompromising than what had been seen before, and it was widely unpopular. Even in the North, civil rights activists were seen as extreme and violent even. Dr. King himself found himself and dozens of others in a local jail after a short campaign of protests and boycotts aimed at desegregating local businesses. How many of you have read King's letter from a Birmingham jail? Let's see in the chat who's read it. I know I read it in high school. Yeah, a lot of people have read it. Some people have not read it. But how many of you have read the letter that it was in response to? How many of you have read this letter from the 8 clergymen? Okay, so I'm seeing, yeah, some people have read it, but a decent amount of people have not read it. And I found that in high school, I read Letter from a Birmingham Jail, but I had never seen this letter that it was actually written in response to. And it feels like it leaves a big part of the whole narrative out. So basically, King was writing in response to other supposed movement leaders who opposed his tactics and thought they were too extreme. And in April of '63, they wrote that these demonstrations are unwise and untimely. And they even thanked Bull Connor for keeping the peace by using fire hoses, attack dogs, batons, rubber bullets, and actual bullets as well to suppress the local Black community from rising up and speaking out for the rights that they should constitutionally have. So when we think back to the civil rights movement, we think Dr. King is a hero. He is this guy that was universally loved, and he was such a movement figure, and everybody loved him. But in reality, he was seen as public enemy #1 by the FBI, and even people within the movement thought he was too extreme. But in May of the same year, a new wave of demonstrations would change public perception across the country. As a result of earlier protests, the adults in the Black community were scared. Their jobs were being threatened. They were being beaten, jailed, and jailed, and killed. And King himself, like we saw, was actually put in jail. And they were essentially, at this point, unable to continue taking action. They had been repressed to the point where their livelihoods were at risk. They were scared. They were beaten up, and they were not going to continue. But against the wishes of their parents and many movement leaders, a new wave of demonstrators stepped up to take action. The school children of Birmingham were getting trained in nonviolence, learning about civil disobedience, and planning a massive demonstration, which they called D-Day. Kids were spreading the news about D-Day far and wide, and with the help of local radio DJs, a movement was building. So these local radio DJs were actually, they had very popular radio shows, and they're on the air using coded language to spread the news that on this certain day, on D-Day, we're all going to get out, we're going to escape our schools, and we are going to swarm Birmingham and take action the way our parents have to demand our rights. So in the first week of May, the word went out, and thousands of school children basically escaped from their schools. And there's this amazing footage of all these kids climbing out school windows, streaming out of schools across the state. And this was just an amazing moment. And thousands of kids from across the state swarmed downtown Birmingham. walking dozens of miles. And this was just an amazing action. And the police were as aggressive and violent as ever. Bull Connor was not about to let up just because these were kids. And they used fire hoses, batons, and dogs to attack wave after wave of trained nonviolent children. And a lot of us have probably seen these images in the past, and they are just grotesque, really horrible images. And we see that these are clearly, young teenage kids. This guy who's just walking into the dogs attacking him, he's doing this because he sees those dogs and he's walking towards them with his hands by his sides because he knows that what he needs to do is create a media spotlight by dramatizing the issue, by painting a clear picture of who is on the side of evil and who is on the side of justice and nonviolence. And it did spark that public narrative that they wanted. Attacking dogs with kids, this was too far even for many undecided white moderates. And as the children were rounded up and jailed in mass, the press was running wild with the story of children being brutalized in Alabama. It cast a national spotlight on the issue, and it forced a response from the president. JFK spoke out, calling on Congress to protect civil rights and sending the National Guard to Alabama to escort Black students later that year. And the next year, the Civil Rights Act was passed nationwide in 1964. And this paved the way for what admittedly few legal protections people of color have today. And there is still so much work to be done for civil rights in the United States. But these actions really accomplished so much of what we have today, and they are an amazing building block for what we can achieve in the future. And now I'm not advocating that we need to send small children into the firing line of water hoses and police dogs, and many leaders at the time, supposedly even MLK, actually argued against this action. But there is a lot we can learn, and the key takeaway from the Children's March, so-called, for me, is that unearned suffering creates sympathy, and it can even change the public opinion as a whole. So when ordinary people who are so obviously good-intentioned and nonviolent face repression and brutality, it dramatizes the reality of that oppression in overt and obvious ways. So Black people in Birmingham were facing this violence at the hands of police every day. This was not an isolated incident. Kids were getting beaten by police all the time. Black people in the community were being lynched. There were bombings on a regular basis. But what they needed to do was create this public spectacle to bring the attention of the public as a whole to this incident. And what they were able to do through dramatizing this action is paint a powerfully simple picture of good and children, nonviolent children, singing songs, marching through the streets versus the evil of these attack dogs and fire hoses and Bull Connor, who is the most rigid, violent segregationist in the country. So I think there's a lot we can learn from various movements, and this is the Civil Rights Act being passed just the next year, MLK in the White House being congratulated for his work. And like I said, just the year before, he had been largely considered a villain even within the civil rights movement. So there really is so much we can learn from these movements, and we need to remember that we are a social justice movement, just like all of these others. And our problems are not unique. Our opportunities are not unique, and we should look back and see what we can learn from these movements. So with that said, I will pass it on to Rachel, who can talk a little bit more about how to actually execute these actions and what it's like to get arrested in these circumstances. Rachel, do you want me to stop screen sharing?
Sure.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Lewis. Yes, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Does that look okay? I'm hoping that's a
Looks
yes.
great, Rachel.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, thanks, Lewis, so much for just all that awesome information. I'm just going to jump right into mine. Again, my name is Rachel Ziegler. I am an organizer with the SF Bay Area chapter, and I've been involved in DXC for around 5 years. So my goal with this section of the training is for you to come out of this with a better and more realistic expectation of what you can expect logistically, physically, and emotionally when you're getting arrested, held in jail, or possibly housed. My hope is that this sets you up with to be less anxious during the actual experience, because you'll have just a better understanding of what to expect in the process. But of course, your experience is going to vary a lot more than mine or others. So, oh, why did it go back to yours? Okay, let me just skim through here. And there we go. So it's Diana. And so the first thing I want to say is that I am not a lawyer. I'm definitely not an expert in this topic, but I have gotten a lot of experience with police over the years, just from being arrested in multiple states across the US. So what I'm telling you is based off of mostly my personal experience and some others who have shared with me. I also ran this content by the DXC legal team and a lawyer just to check for accuracy. So it has, been run by people who do know what they're talking about in a professional sense. There may be questions that I can't actually answer myself, but again, perhaps Lewis could answer, or other people, or I can also connect you to people afterwards. Also note that much of this information is based in the United States, unfortunately. You may have very different experiences based on your country, your state, and even your city. What I've noticed is that the more progressive that a place is, usually the more you can get away with, usually the less legal repercussions in terms of civil disobedience, and usually the less aggression, but again, there's no certainty of that either. But when actually considering planning civil disobedience, I would always recommend consulting with an attorney that deals with activists such as ACLU, and also knows your local area better and can give you better advice based on your local laws. And just an overview of what I'll be going over is legality of civil disobedience, police behavior, types of police interactions, how to respond, and really how not to respond to police, what to generally expect when getting arrested, and then some booking and housing. So this probably looks really familiar to a lot of you. So first question is civil disobedience legal? Well, no and yes. Because the definition of civil disobedience is the refusal to comply with certain laws, or to pay tax, or refusal to pay taxes and fines as a peaceful form of political protest. So we believe in upholding the law, but sometimes there are laws, like Lewis said, that are unjust and that we must challenge, much like other social justice movements have done. Also, sometimes you must break a lesser law to uphold a higher law. Like, for an example with this would be right to rescue, trespassing onto someone's property in order to rescue someone who is in need of help. There's also some laws that are, in fact, already just, and we are simply asking the law to enforce them. So a lot of you have probably heard of our example in California, which is 597E, which says that if a domesticated animal is being denied food or water, and shelter up to 12 hours, you have the legal right to go in and give them that. And so that is something that we here in California challenge, because we actually say, well, this is what the law actually says, and we're just asking you to uphold this and allow us to come in and care for these animals in these farms that all need food and water and medication and rescue. you would like, if you wanted to plan something like this in your local area, you would want to look up similar laws near you to see if that's, if there are laws that are similar in that way that you can use as sort of like a loophole of sorts. Typically during civil disobedience, though, you should expect that arrest is likely to happen, and you should prepare for that outcome. All right, so now I'm going to get into just different legal terminology and different types of, I'll focus right now on different types of police interactions. So the first is consensual. So this is when the police are interacting with you and you can at this point choose to interact with them or not. You probably shouldn't because they're just trying to get information out of you. But legally there is nothing holding you in place of them standing in front of you. You can walk away, you can ignore them, although I would not necessarily recommend that. I would be polite and just say I would rather I'd rather not talk to you. And just be on your way. At this point, you're free to leave. An example of this during a protest would be, or civil disobedience or any action would be, if you're just standing there on public property, and the police officer comes up to you and says, "Hey, how's it going? What are you doing here?" At this point, you can just say hi, or not even say hi. You can just stand there, maybe nod your head, and just ignore them. You don't need to interact. And this is if they don't press further than that, or or they don't say that you're detained, or don't give off body language that you're detained, like this is a consensual interaction. You can walk away, and unless they stop you, this is a consensual interaction. There's you're not bound to be near them. Okay. And now detention is, when you're detained, at this point, the police will typically question you, possibly search you, run your license, and then release you. If they don't have any evidence to arrest you, lose interest in arresting you, or their superior gives them orders not to arrest you. At this point, you should identify yourself, but not answer any of their questions, especially if it's about the event or anything that led you to being detained. Police legally need reasonable suspicion that illegal activity has taken place in order to detain you, but they have a lot of discretion and can detain you for just about any reason. Police can basically arrest you just walking down the street. They legally need a reason, but often don't follow that. So what this would look like at an action is if you are, you're stopped, or police comes up to you and they start asking you questions, and you try to walk away, and they, put their hands up, or they stop you, they tell you to stop, or any interpretation of that, like you're not going anywhere, or just any body language or verbal communication that says like you are, don't leave. At this point, you should ask them, am I free to leave? Am I being detained? And they will, probably tell you yes. And you should ask them, like, what is the cause for reasonable suspicion? And they should tell you this, but oftentimes don't for various reasons. But you should, if you can get that answer, then you should try to remember it in case it does go to court, and then you have something to, because oftentimes they'll change what they said when they're actually in court to make it seem like whatever you did was like worse than it was. Because oftentimes in the moment, they're just looking for a reason to detain you, and they don't necessarily have like a real reason. But aside from that, aside from asking them if you're being detained, you should just remain silent and say this out loud to them: I would like to remain silent. And then, don't go any further than that with them. There's also cited and released, which is similar to being detained, and it's kind of like in between detained and arrested. You are detained, but then you are just basically cited and released. You're given charges, but you're not actually taken to jail. But you will likely need to actually show up to court for this, and usually they'll just give you like a slip of paper that has information on it. And then, of course, there's arrest, which is, at this point, you are now in legal custody. You will likely be taken to jail, where you'll be charged criminally. police technically need what's called a probable cause to conduct a full arrest, but just like a stop and detention, they have a lot of discretion, and they can and do arrests whenever they want to, knowing that the worst that can happen to them is that the district attorney will just dismiss the charge, and it's not a big deal for them. There's been a lot of times in my life, even outside of activism, where I've just like been charged with something, whether it was like driving or whatever, and it's like you go to court and then it's, they just dismiss it, and it's just not a big deal. So you'll be charged. The initial charges will usually be reduced, dropped, or possibly increased. You'll have to show up in court if the charges are filed. If the charges are dropped, you won't have to show up to court, but you might not even know that in advance. But if you're in doubt, you should definitely just go to court, because if not, then there'll be a warrant out for your arrest. Mostly we've experienced like a limbo of between these two charges. The charges aren't filed, but the investigation remains open. That's what happened to a lot of the Sunrise folks, if you're familiar with Sunrise in Petaluma. So yeah, you might have to go to court when this happens, and you might not know that you're not even on the docket, which is the sheet of paper that has people's names on it who have to be at court that day. So you might not even know that until you get to the court, which is really annoying, but they don't necessarily care that you had to take off work for that, or that you drove all the way up there, or whatever it took, as however inconvenient it was for you to get to court that day. So just, always show up to court when in doubt, so that you don't get a warrant out. And then there's housing and sentencing, which I will get into later. So, yeah, being arrested, it usually doesn't look like it does on TV. In fact, I've never had an experience like it on TV. The police will probably not say you are under arrest or read you your Miranda rights. I've never been read my Miranda rights. What should you do if you are arrested? So what you should do is repeat the phrase at the bottom here, which is, I am invoking my right to remain silent and my right to counsel, and I will not speak to you until my attorney is present. So I want to, if everyone can be unmuted and everyone can just say this at the same time. So ready, 1, 2, 3. I am invoking
my right to remain silent, my right to counsel, and I will not speak to you until my attorney is present.
My attorney is present.
You can even just say, I would like to remain silent. I will not speak to you until my attorney is present. You can say variations of this, but as long as you get that gist of it, invoking the right to remain silent is a pretty key point in there. After you have said that, don't say anything else. The only thing that you should say is if you need water, questions about medication, needing to use the bathroom or a phone call or anything like that. Don't even talk about the weather. Don't lie. Don't even say or nod your head or any body language like that, because it can be considered admission or lying. So if the police are asking you questions and you go or nod your head or something, they can actually record that or write that down as you agreeing to something that you did not do or did not want to admit to doing, and they can actually use that in court against you. So, just keep that in mind whenever you're interacting with them. Be very conscious of those things that you might otherwise just think is like, not a big deal. If you do speak about anything, it can void your invocation of your right to remain silent, which will allow them to start questioning you again. So once you've invoked your right to remain silent, it's supposedly illegal for them to question you, although a lot of times they continue asking. So they also may search you, and what you should say in that case is that you do not consent to being searched. So you can just say it out loud, like, I do not consent to being searched, but oftentimes they will. And again, if hopefully that gets recorded and you can use that in court if they find something, if they find anything on you, if you've said out loud, like, I do not consent to being searched, technically, legally, they should not be able to use that in court against you, but oftentimes they do, or at least they try to. Don't resist them physically, but just let them know that you don't consent to it. And some common charges for protesters are resisting arrest, disrupting a public meeting, riot, unlawful assembly, failure to disperse, disturbing the peace, trespassing, etc., or grand theft of fruits and vegetables. So I'm going to just get into the first type of arrest, which is an infraction. So an example of this might be jaywalking. This is it's a pretty low key one. So if you have your ID on you, you'll often just be given a ticket and then released, like cited and released. This happened to one of our activists who was illegally lodging, quote, on the college campus nearby. And he was doing a Robin in a crate action where he was staying in a crate for, I think it was like several days. And so in this case, he didn't get taken to jail, but he did get cited and released. But if you don't have your ID on you, they might take you to jail just because of that, because they're trying to identify you and get your fingerprints and things. So another one is just misdemeanors. So an example of this would be like disturbing the peace. They'll likely take you to the station for fingerprints and photographing. If you have your ID, they will often release you on what's called a promise to appear, unless they believe, like afterwards, unless they believe that you'll continue to, quote, break the law if they do let you go. And then there's felonies. An example of this would be assault or rescuing animals. They can keep you in jail, but you do have the right to bail. It's the birds, they get really activated at night. So they can't keep you in jail, but you have the right to bail. And if you don't bail out, the judge must review your case within 48 hours. That's 2 business days, or 48 hours, and you must be taken to court in 2 business days. Which I'll get into a little bit more later. And I also just wanted to give the slide of staying safe while you're handcuffed. So as you can see on here, like to the right is bad, to the left is good. And the reasoning behind that is that on the side where it's bad, the nerves are being like cut off by the handcuffs right there. Like you can have permanent nerve damage from having your hands placed in that position. So always try to put your wrists like facing each other, like it is on the left, just to prevent something like that happening. Handcuffs in general are really uncomfortable, and you could get handcuffs or you could get zip ties. Neither one of them are very comfortable. And also just another note, like if the police make them too tight, you can ask for them to be loosened. I've seen this happen pretty successfully multiple times, so that's hopeful. But because if it's cutting off your circulation, like even that, it's very uncomfortable and painful. So when in doubt, that's like another example of when like to release or break your invoking your right to remain silent, just to ask that and then say again, like, I would like to remain silent. All right, now I'm going to get into a little bit more about police. First thing to note is that police are focused on getting convictions. Their job depends on getting as many convictions out of you as possible, or out of the public as possible. Individual police officers may be good people. They might even be vegan. They might be sympathetic to our cause. But collectively, while they're in uniform, they are not your friend. They do not have your best interest in mind. And they have been trained to emotionally manipulate you into incriminating yourself and others. They're not here to be supportive of our efforts to change the laws, because the job of police is to enforce the current laws. So they're not like people that you want to be doing outreach to. They're not people who you want to be making friends with while they're in their uniform, especially like during actions. You want to steer clear from them unless you are the police liaison. Another thing to note is that cops are allowed to lie to us, even though you can't lie to them. It's illegal, and you can be charged for that. And they often do things that are violent and even illegal. One example of this that I want to give is Officer Gonzalez. So he's an officer who was all nice to one of our activists a couple years ago at a protest, and they told the activist that his father was a veterinarian and that he was supportive of animal rights. These are actual quotes from him that he also told the activist. I'm vegan, I totally support your cause, you're being very peaceful and we appreciate that. My father was actually a veterinarian. I agree with you all. I've also heard really similar things to this from police officers. And in this case, turns out he is the most dangerous police officer in the Oakland police force, and was actually acquitted, which means found not guilty, for shooting a young Black man to death as he left a store. He's also been involved in numerous incidents that ended with people dying. So, I've also heard a lot of people say, things like, oh, my daughter is vegan, or she's trying to go vegan. And this is all in the same, spirit of them just trying to manipulate you. It's a manipulation tactic to try to get you to be more friendly and more comfortable with them so that you cooperate and that you talk to them. So just be really wary of that. And I know it's not often that we're faced with people in our lives who just flat out like directly try to manipulate you in front of your face in that way. And it's very it messes with your mind. You want to believe that people aren't that awful, or that institutions aren't that awful that they create people to behave this way. But and of course an illegal example is just seeing in the news police shooting unarmed people, sexually assaulting women, doing and selling drugs, etc. I've been really angry about this, the murder of George Floyd that happened yesterday. And just, that's a really classic example of police using their power to, do things that are illegal and just cold-bloodedly kill people. All right. On to what to expect from police. So this is going to vary a lot. So they can be, rough, dramatic, or aggressive, or they can be really gentle and take their time. They can be confused because they don't understand the situation, or because of their chain of command and they can't necessarily make a call themselves. They can be extremely inappropriate, unprofessional, and antagonistic. Some police officers will just straight up mock you and eat animals in front of you, or talk about eating animals in front of you just to try to upset you. I have personally witnessed that a lot and heard a lot of experiences from other people, especially from activists, animal rights activists who have gotten arrested for, animal rights activism. Police can also be very dramatic about the arrest. Some examples of aggression that I've personally experienced are, being cuffed really tightly, being thrown to the ground, and, put their knees on my back to handcuff me. Really rough rides where, just extremely uncomfortable. And at one point my seatbelt wasn't even buckled, and I had to ask them if they could buckle my seatbelt because we had a long drive ahead of us, and I didn't want to die in the back of their car if we got in a car crash. So they're not always being mindful or paying attention to those sorts of things. And, you know, a lot, like I said, a lot of this will vary for who you are. And a lot of police behavior will vary depending on who they are and how agitated they are. It depends on what their personal stance is on what you're doing, how severe the quote crime was. It'll depend on your actions during the action and your attitude towards the police. So, and this is like really important is, you know, if someone is rude to the police, especially an activist in a group, they might take that out on the rest of the group, and especially people who are much more vulnerable, you know, in terms of people of color, LGBTQ people, anyone who is in like a minority group, they might single those people out, or, you know, people who are undocumented, they might single those people out and sort of punish them for, you know, someone else's behavior. So don't, you know, I would just suggest being very respectful and polite to them, even if you know, don't like cops in general, or if they're being really awful, you know, verbally or et cetera to you. Just try to remain really nonviolent and just maintain a respectful demeanor with them. And yeah, again, it's going to vary. Your personal experiences will vary a lot based on your race, your gender identity, ethnicity, class, age, all those things. Which is really unfortunate. In an ideal world, this is not the case, but, you know, as we talked about, like, police do a lot of awful things to people who especially are much more vulnerable in our society. So that is the unfortunate reality of today. What you can most certainly expect, though, is that getting arrested and booking is not a quick process. It may take up to 5 hours. It may take 2 hours, 5 hours, it may take 10 hours, and it may take days. Also, the more people who are arrested with you, the much longer it's going to take. So don't go into an action thinking that this will be like a quick in and out thing, regardless of what the police may tell you. Because a lot of times they'll say like, oh, this will just be really quick. And then it's like, you know, 12 hours later, like, you're still in jail. So they lie a lot. And also, like, even if you have paid bail, it doesn't mean that you're getting out soon or any sooner than anyone else. Because I've seen people pay bail and get out, and people who did not pay bail got out like sooner than them, which is really weird, but it's just the timing of the booking and stuff. So emotionally preparing. So getting arrested, especially for the first time, can be really scary. Your heart might be racing, your adrenaline might be running, you might be feeling really uncertain about what's going to happen next, where you're going, how long you'll be in custody, and, you know, what time you're going to get home. Because this is all like happening in the moment, and there's no one who's like necessarily like talking you through this, and the police certainly aren't going to be like, all right, we're going to this place and this is going to happen and this is what time you'll get out. There's so much uncertainty in jail, and I would say that that's like one of my biggest takeaways from it, is that you're just kind of in a constant state of like uncertainty about, you know, what is going to happen to you in the next 24, 48 plus hours. If you're someone who has a lot of anxiety in stressful situations, you might find it difficult to remain calm and difficult to not talk to the police. So that's something to keep in mind. But just remember that in most cases, nothing horrible is going to happen to you. And when you look back, hopefully you'll be able to realize that it was less scary than you thought it was at the time. And in most cases, the worst that will happen to you is that you'll experience some or a lot of physical discomfort, maybe some mild emotional trauma, and likely legal fees, which is something that fundraising beforehand or right after an action is really helpful with. And again, just be patient. Everything is just going to take a really long time. So all this is not to say that jail can't be a difficult experience, because it's set up to make you very miserable. in order to deter you from not doing these things in the future. But, generally speaking, with activists during mass actions, it has generally been, survivable and, an okay experience. Not like, yay, that was awesome, but like, that was, a sacrifice, but I would be willing to do it again, sort of thing. But again, that all depends on who you are and your circumstances specifically and all that. So more into kind of what to prepare for is preparing to be bored, cold, hungry, tired, uncomfortable, made fun of by officers for your beliefs, mocked for your appearance, to have your personal space violated, attempts made to belittle you or manipulate you, insulted, dismissed, yelled at, treated like a criminal, forgotten about, expect to feel confused about your rights, even if you know them, and prepare to not have your needs taken seriously. An example of this is there was someone who needed medication at one of the times we were jailed after mass action, and he was refused his medication, and then he was mocked for it later. The police officer was like, "Oh, look, you didn't die," and which is really an insensitive thing to say to someone who literally could have died if they didn't get that medication. And so, they're just in this whole different world than we are, and that they're just looking at us and treating us as if we're like so subhuman. And also prepare to be physically uncomfortable basically the whole time. Remember that you are entering into a world of a jail system, and this is not like the outside world. Again, the police are not your friends. They don't have your best interest in mind. You, at this point, no longer have control over your life and what happens to you. And accepting the circumstances and making the best out of it is all you can do. And hopefully trainings like this help to prepare you better for the situation so that it's less intense. But of course, it's always difficult to know like how you actually feel in the moment. Okay. Oops. Just trying to fix my slide. Oh, okay. Okay, there we go. That's actually not the right one. Okay, we'll just stay on this. Okay, so how to treat police. Try not to ask the police a lot of questions. I just wouldn't ask them any questions in general. I mean, like I said, you're going to be wondering a lot of things, but it's best just not to ask them. Instead, try to ask the legal defense person whose number you hopefully wrote on a part of your body, that you can call them and ask them as far as, what's going on, what's going on in the outside world. Don't be sarcastic or have an attitude with the police. Sarcasm is bad for two reasons. It'll piss them off, and they can report those words coldly in the reports, and they can report the words that you said in a very cold way that does not reflect the tone in which you said it, and they can use this against you in court. So maybe you said something really sarcastically. I can't even think of an example, but and it was totally not serious. Well, they can take those words and write them down as like you saying this very literally and very seriously, and it can have like very serious consequences due to that. So avoid any kind of sarcasm or attitude. Remind people to, again, just be like, maybe compassionate is a lot to ask for, but definitely like at least try to pretend as if you have a compassionate and respectful view of the cops, even when you don't like them or don't like the system that they are in. Remembering that they are humans as well. They're still people who have feelings and emotions, and they're kind of, I don't know, caught up in a really awful system as well. I mean, they're likely choosing to do it, but just, they're, at the end of the day, like, they are still like human beings who deserve compassion like we all do. And, if you notice other people who are saying inappropriate things or having an attitude or anything like that, you can try to say things to them like, you don't need to be doing this. This is not helpful. This isn't going to help you or someone else in the situation. Just try to calm them down. If you have an activist in your cell or something that is treating the police in a way that you think that is going to be harmful for them or the rest of the group. And, most importantly, remain nonviolent, both for optics and safety, and just because it's the right thing to do. So, I actually have like maybe a couple, I don't know if people have any questions so far. I could probably have a couple minutes for questions before going into the arrest prep section. Maybe I could give people like 3 minutes or something.
There's a couple questions that came up that I just wrote down from before. So if you have a new question that you haven't asked yet, you can put it in the chat. And some that came up before. So someone asked that they said they were scared to get arrested because does someone need to bail you out? They don't have anyone to bail them out.
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
So someone said they were scared to get arrested because they're asking if someone needs to be able to bail them out, and they said they don't have someone who could bail them out.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's like a situation where if you are not able to stay in jail for the, amount of time that you might think you might be in there for, then it might not be a good idea to get arrested. I mean, a lot of times in the case of our activists during these actions is we'll do like a jail no bail, where we will specifically intentionally not take bail so that, it sends a bold statement to the industry and to the police force that we want to make this sacrifice. So that's kind of the call of, you and the organizer for whatever specific action it might be. I don't know, does that answer?
Could I jump in real quick too?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so I mean, if you are considering taking an action and you just need someone to handle the logistics of bailing you out, not the financial side of it, you can always reach out to legal@dxe.io. And then another option is to go through a bail bonds agency where you could pay a percentage of your total bail and have a company bail you out, but you wouldn't get that back the same way you would if you paid the whole amount. But you can bail yourself out of jail. It's just a lot nicer to have someone else do it for you and a lot less stressful and difficult.
Yeah, that's true. I forget like what a privilege that is in those situations, just to have like someone else to deal with it. Is there another question?
Yeah, a couple people were asking if you ask to use the bathroom, does that void your right to silence?
It does technically, and then you can invoke your right again like after you come back, and so it kind of starts that back up again.
And then also a couple people were asking about the fact that you hadn't been read your Miranda rights, and they said if you don't read your rights, does that invalidate the arrest?
From what I understand, no, because from what I understand, they have up until I think like trial or like you going to prison or something. I mean, Lewis, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they have like up until that point where they can actually read you your Miranda rights.
They need to read you your Miranda rights before official questioning or official interrogation. So if they take you into a room, if they arrest you and you're on the street and they ask you questions about where did you just come from and all of that stuff, that's fine without reading you your Miranda rights. I mean, it's so bizarre that in TV and movies, they always, they cuff you and they tell you you're under arrest, you have the right to remain silent. But it's not until they like take you into a room with the little light swinging and stuff like that they actually have to read you your Miranda rights. So for me, that's never happened when I've been arrested. I've never been like officially interrogated.
Same. Maybe like one more question before I go into the next section.
Sure. So I guess a couple people, so there's a couple things about like time in jail. So Carla said, would you also suggest that it's important not to talk to anyone in the jail, your cellmates or anything, about what you did, because there could be plants or things could be recorded. And someone else was asking if any activists have had experiences where they've been in a cell and something made them feel unsafe, whether it was like another person or just some other circumstance of being there.
To the first point, I'll definitely get into that. But yeah, you're right about not talking to other people about the action or any details that happened. For the second part, I have experienced that. I wasn't necessarily in the same cell. There was a wall dividing us, but he was like screaming a lot of like insults and profanity at me and the other female activist who was in my cell. I mean, I guess if you're asking like maybe what would happen if you did that, you could probably ask an officer if you could be moved to a different cell, or if that person can, and hopefully that would happen. I've never had an experience. Most of the time whenever I've been jailed, it's like with other activists. There might be like one or two other people who weren't involved, and they're usually just really quiet. So yeah, I don't know if other people have experiences like that.
Lawrence is saying that he has had experience
with a plant.
Yeah. Do we want to have him speak for a minute?
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to unmute you, Lawrence.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for doing this training. It's always great to get a refresher. So for the specific situation that I was in, there was somebody brought in, and the police officer that brought this person in, we were actually in a holding cell. You could be in a holding cell, you could be in a room on hard chairs for hours, possibly throughout the night, being told you can't lay down. But in this situation, there was overflow and we were in a holding cell. And when this other person was brought in, the police officer said, "Hey, this person's with your group, right?" I don't remember if we replied yes or no, because it was just happened very quickly. But then we quite quickly realized that this person wasn't with our group, and they started talking a lot. They started wanting to know a lot of information, and they seemed to know a lot of information. Like, they were giving us a ton of information, and they were trying to create buddy-buddy with us and a whole bunch of things. And eventually, so what I did was, because people were tired, there were multiple people in this cell, I just said, we're not going to talk about anything. We're not going to talk about anything. And I was kind of trying to get people's attention. And in many cases, I went up to each of the individual people and whispered in their ear what I felt was going on, just to protect everybody. My feeling as to why it was a plant is based on what happened, and the fact that once we ended up getting to the jail, they read this person's name off, and that person was nowhere to be found. And they got escorted out of the cell. They came in way later after us, hours. They got escorted out. We never saw them again. And the person got visually frustrated once they realized that they were just stuck there and they had been figured out. So that did exactly happen to us.
Wow, that is really fascinating. I've never had an experience like that, but it's a really good reminder to watch out for those sorts of things, because you never know. Yeah, you never know who you're sharing the cell with, and they do put plants like that. Thanks, Lawrence, for sharing that.
You bet.
So I'm going to move on to the next section, which is more about arrest preparation. So here you go. All right. So for the booking process, basically booking is whenever you arrive at the jail, And basically the moment you like get out of the whatever vehicle you arrived in is like where the booking process begins, or once you reach your holding cell or holding room. Each step is basically going to, like, what to generally expect may depend a lot on where you live. Again, like I don't know how this compares to like other countries, for instance, because I've never been arrested in those other countries. I'd be interested to hear from people if anyone on here has been arrested in other countries, if this process sounds similar. Write it in the chat. That would be really interesting to know. But yeah, so this is when booking is when you're taken to an actual building and you sit and wait and you're basically processed and are either bailed out or see a judge. Your name will likely be called several times throughout the time, or will be called several times throughout the time that you're in the holding cell or room, and it's in no particular order. It's not alphabeticalized. It's not in the order that you came in. I would love to know like what behind the scenes is going on that it takes so long for this process to happen, or like why it's in a particular order or why there's no order. So, one of the things that will happen is that they'll record your, like what's called vital information. So they'll, write your name, contact information, nature of the alleged crime. And most of this information will be taken from the citation or account of the incident. Another thing that will happen is your mugshot. So you'll get your height and recorded, any tattoos that you have on you. Actually, I've had experiences where they didn't record any tattoos, but the last time I was arrested in Nevada, they took really detailed notes of every single one of my tattoos and were like very thorough about it and took pictures of them. And so I've never had that happen. So that is something where I say varies, but they're basically, making sure that they have pictures of those identifying marks that are on your body. There's the mouth swab, and this is only for if you're arrested on felonies. And so there's a lot of us in the Bay Area who were arrested on felonies and past actions. Doesn't mean they were charged with felonies, but they were arrested on felonies and it was later reduced. But a lot of them had to give mouth swabs because they were arrested on felonies. Another thing that will happen is fingerprinting. So they'll take an impression of your fingerprints. If the crime in question has fingerprint evidence, they'll be compared to yours in order to either find a match or eliminate you as a suspect. Your fingerprints are then kept in a database indefinitely. You may, like I said, also be asked to submit a DNA sample or saliva or hair. And they'll also be checking for warrants. So the police conduct a search through the database for any outstanding warrants that you may have. Sometimes the police are able to solve other crimes just by chance if they pick someone up for an unrelated crime and then they end up matching. So be mindful of this when you're deciding to take on more legal risk. If you have outstanding warrants for something else, you might end up, kind of just in there for a lot longer or having more severe consequences because of that. Another thing they'll do is health checks. So personnel at the police station will conduct a general health screening to make sure you're either in need of that you're not in need of immediate medical care, or you're not a threat to the officers or the other people that you're being held with. This could include blood tests and even x-rays. Often though, it's just a series of questions. And another thing to note is that just because you've gone through each of these steps in the process that I just mentioned doesn't mean that you are going to be leaving soon. I always get like excited, like, all right, I'm done with everything. I should be out of here within an hour. And then it's like 5 hours later and you're like, what? I don't understand what's happening. Like bail has been paid. I've gone through all of these steps, because I know what the steps are. So what is the hold up? And I really don't know. My guess is that they just have other things to do, or it's not a priority, or maybe they're intentionally lagging on the time so that you're in there longer just to punish you. Who knows? I'd like to know if anyone does know like why takes so long, put it in the chat.
Rachel, are you trying to share slides right now?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I never shared my screen.
You were for a long time, don't worry. You have been for most of the time, at least.
Oh, that's good. That's great. It's okay. There was not really a lot of this was all I was showing. All right, so police questioning. Some of the questions that you might be having in jail are, do they have to notify us if they take any of our stuff for evidence? The answer, or what's the procedure for getting it back? So the answer is no, they don't need to identify you or notify you about getting it back. Getting it back requires basically to wait up to a year by continuously calling to see if it's been released back to you. If you're going to trial, it could be even longer to get your stuff back. Anything on you can be taken as evidence and used against you in court. So a lot of our stuff was taken at the action that was in September of 2018. It was like, people's laptops, canopies, cameras, like a whole bunch of other really expensive equipment that had a lot of our footage on there and stuff. We just got it back a few months ago. So again, that was September 2018. We just got it back a few months ago. So it can take a really long time. So don't, I know people's phones who have been used as evidence. So you could go into an action with your phone and then not get that back for, a year or so. So, don't take things with you that you don't want to see back in that span of time. You might also be asking, how long will I be in here for? You could be in there for up to 48 hours until you see a judge if you aren't taking bail. The judge will set another bail amount, which is usually lower than the original amount and is often zero. A week to a month would only be if you're denied bail, which in my understanding is pretty unlikely. In Sonoma County, which is a local county in California, we were in there for 4 days because we were arrested on a Saturday. Sorry, the birds are being really loud right now. Because we were arrested on a Saturday and weren't released until Tuesday. I think Monday might have been like a holiday or something, so it didn't count in that 2 business day. You might also be asking, is anyone trying to get me out of here? The cops may, probably will lie to you about this and play mind games with you, partially just to get you to talk. Try to trust your friends over the police, for sure. Especially if this was an event organized by DXC, I would hope you feel pretty confident that there's people on the outside who are working to get you out of there or supporting you in whatever way that looks like if you're not eager to get out of there. Once you're arrested and booked, your case is sent to the appropriate prosecutor's office where an independent decision is made as to what charges should be filed, if any. A prosecutor is not bound by the initial charging decision and can later add or subtract charges once they do investigate. It could involve more evidence, could involve only the evidence the police provided initially. And then there's housing, which is when you stay overnight or several nights and are put into a separate area of the jail and put into uniform, typically strip searched and then given a bed. And then there's sentencing, which is, jail short-term or prison long-term, which prison long-term is usually over a year. And then there is holding cells and rooms. This is where you'll be held while the booking process is taking place. So this is a jail holding room as an example. This is the one that is in Sonoma County. This is, okay, I didn't put a cell on it. So this is like an example of the holding room, but oftentimes they'll look a lot more like this, basically. So in housing, you are usually being divided or put into where you are based on your what they call holding rooms, you're typically being put in there based on what they call your current biological sex. And what they're like is basically a concrete floor, usually one bathroom that is visible to everyone. Especially if they're standing, there's usually only like a short concrete wall that is dividing them between everyone else. So basically when everyone, pees, poops, or anything like that, like everyone can see it, smell it, hear it, all that. There's usually one sink that might or might not work. I've been in ones where they didn't. There's usually toilet paper. Sometimes there isn't though. And it can be difficult to get to flag a police officer down to get them to actually change it or give you more. Sometimes there'll be a small window to look out of, but they might close the blinds. And then if you're someone who is really claustrophobic, this might be a really difficult experience for you. You can often lay down on the floor if there's sometimes benches inside that are either metal, wooden, or concrete. And that's usually one of the perks from holding rooms that look like this or similar, because these are chairs that you cannot lay down. You're not allowed to lay down in them, versus if you're in a cell like this, you can actually lay down. You don't typically get beds like this, but I will say in Nevada, where I was arrested for the Bernie disruption, they had blankets, a bed, a pillow, a toothbrush, and a cup. And this is pretty unusual from my experience, but that was definitely the most bougie jail I've ever been in, and I was blown away by the fact that they gave us all those things. So yeah, more into housing. Moving on to housing, what does it mean to actually be housed while you're in jail? So this is when you're no longer being held temporarily in a holding room or cell. Within a short period of time after being arrested, you'll be arraigned, which is your first appearance in front of the judge. Arraignment should take place the same day. However, in some counties, there's not a judge available every day, and likely not on the weekends. So you could be arraigned immediately or made to wait a few days until the judge is available. While waiting for arraignment, you will be housed, which means held at a jail until you are arraigned and post bail. You'll be housed with other inmates who are also awaiting arraignment, or if you get lucky, with another activist. They might be awaiting arraignment, trial, serving their sentence, or waiting to transfer to state prison. If you chose not to post bail, you'll be housed for a more extended period of time. In your initial hearing is a court proceeding in which your lawyer or public defender represents you and talks with the judge to see what your charges are now, what your bail will be set to based off of those charges, or if there is no bail and you can be released on your own recognizance, or they'll refer to it as ORD. You'll be present in the courtroom in your inmate uniform, and you'll be sitting in the inmate section. If any of you have ever been to a courthouse, there's usually those rows of seats across from the judge, and that's where you'll be. The reason these charges could change is because the police will initially charge you with basically whatever they can and as much as they can, and it's usually much harsher than the actual crime or quote crime. They just basically throw everything at you that they can and hope that some of them stick. The judge tends to see things a little more objectively, luckily, and gives you the charges that they think are actually deserved based on the police report. So that's kind of how that works. So your rights in jail are that you have a right to 3 phone calls after being booked. But yeah, unless you're with a lawyer, they can record these. Sometimes they still record them if you're with your lawyer, even though they're not supposed to. So don't say anything over the phone that you would not want to be recorded, other than things like if you have any special needs or any animal care or child care, things like that. Don't say anything about the action or about the arrest. And as Carla mentioned, don't talk about the action to anyone who is in your cell with you. It can be really, really difficult, especially after such an adrenaline inducing action like that. All you want to do is talk about it. That's all you can think about. But try just doing things like humming, or playing games that you can do in a jail cell. Just like I Spy or something. Well, there's not a lot of colors in there, but whatever you can think of to try to get your mind off of it. Just don't talk about it in there, because like Lauren said, that there could be people in there who are planted there to collect that information, but they're oftentimes recording regardless, and so they'll pick up on anything that you're saying. And by saying things that happened during the action, you can just incriminate yourself and other people who were there. So yeah, and then just briefly, legal support, what you can expect to be going on the outside, especially if this is a large action organized by a DXC. You can generally expect that there's a press team and a communication, or even if you're outside there, and then hopefully other organizations have this as well. But there is hopefully a press team and communications team who is like sending out press release, getting footage, making sure that the action is as impactful as possible. Your contacts are being called. If you should have hopefully filled out a jail support form, and those people who are being contacted, if you asked for them to be contacted if you're arrested, your animals are getting taken care of and all that, calling your job, etc., things like that. So while you're in jail, it's just good to remember like why you did these actions, and that it is going to be impactful, and that when you get out, there's going to be a lot of support for you by all your friends, hopefully your family, especially other activists though. So yeah, I could get into like so much more, and I have like such a more in-depth version of all of these things, but I had to condense it into a short hour. So that is the end. And yeah, Lewis and I are happy to take some questions. I'm going to have to hop off soon for therapy, but I'm happy to stay on for a couple more minutes. And I think Lewis said they're going to stay on for a while too. So yeah, thanks so much for coming. And, I hope to see you all out in action someday, whatever role you take.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks, Lewis, and to their team as well, the trainings team, for putting this on and being with us tonight. You mentioned, when you see people in an action, and just kind of whatever role they take on at that action. And so someone was asking for like, what about people who want to help but can't get arrested or don't want to for whatever reason? What can they do? Or people who are like living in other places and far away, how can they support?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's so many other roles to take than getting arrested. There's help with social media. There's help with jail support, because there's honestly a lot of times when I'm in jail, I'm like, I got the easy part. Like there's so much work to be done out there that people are doing that, it's just, so there's jail support. Jail support, social media. There's Lewis, help me out.
There's, you can be on the green team of an action that doesn't go onto the property if people are trespassing or whatever. There's all kinds of other actions that you can take, other lower risk forms of protest and different kinds of action you can take. Fundraising is a huge thing. So people that are able to donate bail can be extremely expensive. So that's one way that a lot of people might be able to help. There's infinite work to be done if anybody has the time. I know we have a lot more time during shelter in place, so there's just so much work to be done.
So a question also is, during booking, it seems like the police ask a lot of questions, and some seem, legit questions, and others are kind of more intrusive, and they make it, this is from Anna, and I guess she's speaking partially from experience. They made it sound very much like I would be in much more trouble if I did not comply. Is this another time to invoke silence? I seem to recall the police saying we had to answer those questions during booking.
I can answer this.
Oh yeah, good.
Oh, sorry, Carla asked that in the chat.
Rachel, or are you going to answer, or should I?
Sorry, I thought you said you were going to. Go ahead.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so basically, the only kind of question you need to answer from police ever is your basic identifying information. So that's anything they would be able to find on your ID. So that's the only information you ever need to give them. However, there's certain medical, both physical and mental health information that you might want to give them to make the process easier. So if they ask you, what's your name, what's your birthday, what's your address, what's your phone number, you need to answer all that, or you could be in more trouble. If they ask you, what's your job, you don't need to answer that, and I would recommend not answering it. They have gone after people's occupation and they've called their job, for example, especially if they have a professional license, like they're a nurse or a teacher or something like that. But they might also ask you something along the lines of, have you ever attempted suicide, or are you considering suicide right now? And you're not required to answer that, but if you refuse to answer it, they might put you in a padded room and it is not going to be a fun experience. So I would recommend, frankly, I would recommend just telling them that you are not considering suicide. Because your friends who are going to be in jail with you are going to be much better support than they will provide you from a bloody, poop-covered, padded room, which is essentially the other alternative. So that's kind of a rule of thumb.
Cool. I don't know if you need to jump off, Rachel, but I figured I'd give you a chance.
I do.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Thank
But
you
maybe
all
Lewis
so
can
much.
stay on for
Thanks,
a couple minutes
Rachel.
and take
Yeah,
it.
I'm free for a while.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much, Rachel. And yeah, I see lots of people expressing their gratitude in the chat. So thanks for
Thank
being
you
with
all.
us.
Yeah, really.
Bye. All right. So another question. Let's see here. Is it legal to video interactions with the police with your phone, and is that a good idea?
Yeah, videotaping interactions with police is legal. And I would recommend always videotaping interactions with police. Even if you see someone else on the street interacting with police and you think it might escalate, or it is at an escalated level, maybe videotape that as well. They can, however, at the point of detention and arrest, control what you're doing with your body. So if you are holding your phone, they can handcuff you, for example. They can't necessarily turn off your phone, but they can handcuff you. They can tell you to put the phone down, especially at the point of arrest. And then if somebody else wants to videotape that interaction, they can, but they may be told to keep a certain distance as to not cause safety concerns for the officers, or as to not interfere with the investigation. So definitely always recommend videotaping interactions. And if someone else is videotaping your interaction, you might keep in mind that you should project really loud to make sure whatever you're saying is getting caught by that videotaping. And it's legal to videotape police, especially in public, anywhere in the United States. And they will tell you that it's not legal. Don't listen to them. It is legal everywhere in the United States. And you don't need to tell them that you're recording, I don't think, but you might as well. One thing is that videotaping interactions usually de-escalates the situation because they feel the accountability. And we know in this day and age, videos of police misconduct often go viral. But in more cases than not, nothing happens with that video, and it can aggravate police officers, and you do not want to be dealing with aggravated police. So you have to weigh the pros and cons there.
Thanks. Yeah, I always try to videotape the police, especially since I've been living in the United States, but I think a lot of police forces in many countries, you know, as we see, sometimes take advantage of their power or are put in situations that that just end poorly. So someone asked if it's better to live stream interactions with the police.
There are definitely benefits to live streaming. So a benefit to live streaming might be that if you were to be arrested and you were filming your interaction, you might not have access to that phone with the video on it for an extended period of time. Like we said earlier, it's been over 1.5 years in some instances until we get our property back after being arrested. So if you're live streaming, though, that information is immediately going to the cloud. The ACLU has an app, which is really cool, which allows you to, yeah, exactly. Sarah's talking about it in the chat deal, whatever. Yeah, this ACLU app, it's really cool. You press a button on your phone and it starts recording and it goes right to the cloud where the ACLU can access that video. Sarah, could you say the name of the app? I can't remember it. Yeah, so this app is cool. And then if you do want to live stream an interaction with police, especially if you have, a lot of friends on Facebook or something like that, it might be interesting. Mobile justice, yeah.
Cool. Max was asking, why do the police sometimes pick out only a few people to arrest when there's many people doing the same thing? And can they even do that? Is that something you could bring up in court later?
Yeah, so it's always up to the discretion of police whether they're going to arrest someone for something or not, as we often see with very privileged people and wealthy elites not facing consequences for things that you or I might face consequences for, or other marginalized communities might. So it's always up to their discretion who they're going to arrest and who they're not going to arrest. They might base that off of, and this is in the US I'm strictly speaking for, I assume in most common law countries it's the same. They might base that on, I think this person is a leader, or, they sometimes refer to the head of the snake. So they might target those people. They might target people that they think are particularly vulnerable, and the opposite of a leader, where they are going to be more bothered and more scared and more disadvantaged by being arrested. And that is up to their discretion. It's a huge pain to arrest people, especially a large number of people. Most local municipalities are not prepared for that. So it's great for them if they can just arrest a few people and it has the same effect.
Great, thanks. Oh no, my list of questions. Okay. So Maru asked, what should we do if another activist is saying bad stuff to the police? So I guess either like kind of behaving in a way that's maybe antagonizing them, or maybe like disclosing information that they shouldn't.
So the number one thing I would recommend is knowing who you're getting arrested with, and if you can, try to control that. And if you can try to be in some high stress situations with someone before getting arrested with them, that's great. And usually, I know if Joanna and I get arrested, she's not, you never know, but there's a very low likelihood that Joanna is going to freak out on the cops and start yelling at them or something like that. But if we all agree to something beforehand, if we all agree that we're going to be polite, that we're not going to talk about the action while we're in jail, all this stuff, you can kind of refer back to that later and say, hey, we agreed to this. We don't want to get other people in trouble. A lot of the time you can just appeal to the fact that, I'm just going to make assumptions here. It's always been my experience that white men are the ones that start yelling at the cops in jail as part of activist groups. And white men are never going to be, privileged white men are probably not going to be the ones most negatively affected by the backlash against them. So it's not just going to be you that gets repercussions for treating the police poorly. It's going to be everyone else, and it's going to be problematic. So really just trying to be polite, don't get in an argument with them, don't escalate them more, but just try to, calm them down.
So Jenny is asking if resisting arrest has ever been, charged to activists for going limp.
So resisting arrest is a strange charge. There are different interpretations, and yes, activists have been arrested under resisting arrest. I've been arrested for resisting arrest a number of times when I'm not resisting, or I'm not even trying to go limp. But most interpretations say that you have to be actively resisting. So the lack of muscle input by going limp is not resistance, but if you were pulling away from them, that would be resistance. But there are different interpretations, and it would be up to the arresting officer what they're going to charge you with, and then it would be up to the judge to make a final decision on that. But I don't know of any activists that offhand that have been actually convicted for resisting arrest for going limp.
All right, so maybe we'll just do like one more question. So maybe you could just share some tips. Jess asked how to get a lawyer beforehand, especially if you don't really have access to money for that. So maybe you could just share some tips on finding lawyers and that side of things.
I've been extremely privileged that we have an awesome legal team here in the Bay Area and in Berkeley. And you are privileged too, because our legal team will help you out in most instances. So if you're doing a really cool action and you might need legal support, you can email legal@dxe.io, and somebody can put that in the chat. And you can request help finding a lawyer. And sometimes they won't be able to help because there's a lot of work that they have to do already. But that's a good way. Another good way is reaching out to your local ACLU chapter and seeing if anyone there can help. And a lot of the time, even if they can't provide support directly, they can recommend someone else. And then finally, in the US, you have a right to a public defender, with the caveat that that's only true if you make under a certain amount of income. And in California, that's pretty low. I think it's around $25,000 a year. So for a lot of us, we might make more than that, and then we would have to supply our own lawyer if we can't find one who's willing to work pro bono.
Yeah, one other thing I learned speaking to a lawyer was, and this person was an activist lawyer, so they were supportive of animal rights, had also kind of done activism and supported activists in other movements. And, they were saying if we did want to plan some kind of thing where multiple people were maybe going to get arrested, to reach out to lawyers in advance and see like what kinds of legal resources we have access to, and then maybe like plan on only getting a certain number of people arrested based on the number of people who we had to defend them. So, you might want to, before participating in something like this, make sure that you have the legal support that you need for the number of people or for yourself.
Legal support is always one of the biggest bottlenecks for action participation. And if you're a lawyer, or if you know a lawyer, or if you're wealthy or you know someone who's wealthy, those are the two biggest ways, honestly, that we could probably use support. And that's the biggest limitation for more and more people being involved in taking action.
Great. Well, I think we can probably wrap it up. We've sufficiently gone over time for tonight. But I don't know if there's a way, Louis, for folks to contact you or the rest of the team if they have further questions, or if you have anything else you wanted to like plug here at the end.
Yeah, we actually had a slide for that, but it's on Rachel's part of the thing, so it's fine. You can email me at louis@dxe.io. And you can ask for my phone number if you want to talk on an encrypted app. And then one really exciting thing is that we're going to be sending out a survey after this training. And we basically want to know how many people in our community are ready or interested in taking nonviolent direct action and civil disobedience, like what we've been discussing. Especially if you're in the US, we really want to know like who are the people that want to be reached out to about this stuff. And we want to make sure that people are getting the opportunities that they are ready for. So that survey will be sent. Look out for it, and put your name and your phone number, especially if you're actually interested in being reached out to. And yeah. Anna put my email in the chat.
Bailey's asking if it's the same survey that folks after the first training were sent.
Yeah, we've asked people to fill this out a couple times, although I don't think there was a name or phone number section on the first version, so you might consider filling it out again.
Yeah, and I'll just say a lot of the Eventbrite emails go to people's spam and junk folder, so maybe just check your spam and junk in the next day or two to find that survey. Cool. Well, thanks so much for everyone taking the time to be here with us and you know, just spending time learning more about these things and preparing ourselves for when we can take action. And thanks to Lewis and Rachel and the rest of the trainings team for putting this together. And yeah, it's been great seeing you all, and I hope to see you all soon. And have a good rest of your night. Bye.
Thanks,
Everyone.
Joanna. Thanks, everyone.